Gospels. Interest within ancient manuscripts identified as Gospels developed within association to an obstacle Judaism encountered, and accordingly such encountering also cast doubt upon an exclusivity Israel substantiated within respect to Judaism's exclusive resonance to a history associated with the Creator, pronounced as theology. Accordingly, such interest developed into a resolute determination futurizing some outcome associated with Gospels, given the identification that the manuscripts bore some relationship to such obstacle Judaism encountered. In examining ancient Israel, an identification is made which places their triumphs within the hands of a deity which is not bound to any physical realm, and therefore such conquests held some special place within the ancient world because they were by Semitic peoples identified as within association to the will of God, which in this case is more well pronounced as the Creator. Accordingly, such conquering refrained, and Israel was faced with great opposition, and even was held captive to Babylon for 70 years. From Israel's inception the Hebrew prophesied, and such prophetization developed into pronouncement of a Messiah, and such deliverer was foretold to unbound Israel from bondage and subject Israel's captors to Jewish captivity. The obstacle to such prophecy perpetuated as the historically referenced First Roman-Jewish War, and the decisive event within such conflict is identified as the Siege of Jerusalem taking place in the year, which is now marked as 70 CE. This event is described as the sieging of the natural fortification identified as Jerusalem by the Roman legions led by Titus Vespasianus, and the destruction of Jerusalem's Second Temple. What occurred within events associated with this period was very certainly extremely calculated, and it is the evidence of such calculatedness which developed into interest within an association between such obstacle to Judaism and manuscripts identified as Gospels. However, the circumstances are exhibitive of an occasion wherein such association has been very nearly entirely set aside in favor of a narrative exhibitive of the crucifixion and resurrection of an itinerant Nazarene which Gospels identify upon the surface. Accordingly, Gospel is exhibitive of something unique within respects to that which is identified as literature, in that upon the surface such relates a narrative within association to an itinerant Nazarene who as a type of teacher enthralled his contemporaries with an exhibition of otherworldly wisdom. However, underneath the surface there is a substantially different information set, being that which identifies rules demonstrating governance of a biological mechanism. Within such respects, what Gospel identifies beyond what is suggested by the narrative at face value is best analogized as an unorientable surface, wherein one face of the surface pronounces a mixed strategy equilibrium necessary to the device's reification, and the alternate face indexes within a disarray of data strategy sets necessary to the instrumentation of stable client states, and thus what Gospels literate as being within concurrence is moreover that which is anachronistic and rather more attributive of consecutiveness. However, the exercise of a mixed strategy demonstrating various means of regional destabilization determines that the proturiency of such consecutiveness is fraught with perpetual interruption throughout a stage within association to the device's reification of an objective exhibitive of modernity. Such interruptions are defeating to certain types of progress, however, are necessary to the sustainment of the device's stochastic feature, being essential to the device's reification of an objective exhibitive of modern finance. Implications of failed diplomacy. Gospel identifies a representative who bears some association to the prophet Jonah. Such association is within respect to that which is exhibited as the issuing of portent and otherwise an attempt to secure diplomacy. However, Gospel lacks identification within respect to the issuer of such representative, or otherwise is suggestive of a fallacy. Gospel identifies Israel as wicked vinedressers within association to a failure of diplomacy offered by the Roman aristocracy, and alternativeness accordingly being exhibitive of a contingency within association to the rejection of such offer is gospelly identified as a wedding banquet. The denotation Bindresser is suggestive of Israel's exercises of militarism within the acquisition of what is biblically identified as the Promised Land. Within such respects, ancient Israel's reputation within association to acquisition of the lands promised Abraham was not without flaw. However, Judaism had by some convoluted means developed a theological connection to the Creator, and within association to trials endured within the wilderness espoused a relationship to egalitarian society. The former lacks generationally extensible and creditable validation without a modern or contemporary exhibition of otherworldliness, and the latter is identified theologically and pronounced philosophically, however lacks bounds necessary to precedent within association to such development beyond origination, culminating from the tribulations the tribes of Israel endured within the wilderness. Whether or not a birthright suggestive of theological exclusiveness espousing Israel to the Creator culminating into deliverance of a promised land is authentic or not, such sordidness of means developed into a matter of contention to the Roman aristocracy, who began to ensure the developments Roman culture had manifested were not reappropriated by the Jews, given the profound enunciation of Judaism identifying an exclusive theological relationship to the Creator. The esoteric gospel relating of circumstances involved with such obstruction to Judaism is that which neither disidentifies nor pronounces differentiation between Vespasian Flavius and the supreme deity, or the Creator, which Israel's biblical history suggests captivated the ranks of a nomadic and tribal Israel, cultivating such ranks into a Judaic people having espoused with egalitarian society, and in doing so laid claim on lands preserved by a covenant such supreme deity guaranteed the Hebrew patriarch Abraham. It was a tradition of the ancient Romans to honor the genius of those deserving with deification, and the pronouncement of Vespasian and Titus as deities accompanied circumstances bound to the emergence of a reifying biological mechanism having over the course of 2 millennia fulfilled an objective exhibitive of the development of technology necessary to modernity demonstrated by the electronic age, and in concert to the development of infrastructure necessary to modern finance, and in doing so also called into question an exclusivity which ancient Israel dominated, being exhibitive of a private theological association to the Creator of all within existence, belonging to nature. How this has played out is within accord to what science identifies as a biological mechanism, and within such respects such mechanism, according to the rule set within association to the device's governorship, exhibits deliberate timing within association to the fulfillment of an objective necessary to empire, being demonstrative of the technology and infrastructure necessary to modern finance, and an espousing of the devices to egalitarian society, given the innateness of the device's makeup, being in accord with a long history of perpetual destabilization and the exercise of equilibriums necessary to the instrumentation of stable client states. Within such respects, the biological mechanism is governed by a rule set esoterically conscribed within Gospels, and such rule set identifies a duality of means for the device to attain a preordained finality. Once such objective within association to the reification of technology necessary to modern finance has been fulfilled, and the necessity for such variousness is within association to the failure of a contingency marked within the rule set demonstrating governorship of the device as having association to the exercise of a strategy inadmissible to such finalities egalitarian preordainment. According to the rule set exhibiting governorship of the device, within the device's penultimate stage and post-reification of modern finance, the device is either exhibitive of a bifurcate composed of a principal alliance of empire and a counterpart dissident alliance suitable to amalgamation and annihilation of the device's stochastic feature being necessary to the next stage of the device involved with the catalysis of outliers, or alternatively within such penultimate stage, the device is exhibitive of a bifurcate wherein such amalgamation is rationally unpronounceable, being within association to a failed contingency wherein the exercise of strategy inadmissible to the device's egalitarian finality is historically evincible, determining that the stochastic feature sustains and the device faces An apocalyptic future necessary to the preordainment of the device's egalitarian finality. Such resolve towards the device's finality and the device's penultimate stage is denoted within synoptics as the Last Supper, and an alternativeness to such being that which pronounces an apocalyptic means to return the device to resync is indexed within the non-synoptic John as a series of depictions identified within reverse canonicity throughout the manuscript and interspersed between depictions exhibitive of the literary device's framework. The former, synoptic resolution, identifies an optimum safe outcome within association to the device's resolve to finality, and the latter, non-synoptic resolution, identifies the means necessary to reassociation of an invaluable utility to a principal alliance of empire involving that which is exhibitive of persuasion rather than an exercise of force. The latter is exhibitive of an uncontrolled resolution within association to the device's finality, wherein the device necessitates a resolution lacking optimal annihilation of a stochastic feature innate and necessary to the reifying characteristic of the device. However, such stochastic feature is demonstratively a hindrance to the device following the device's identification with modernity. In alternativeness to such uncontrolled resolution within association to the device's finality and within accord to the reassociation of an invaluable utility to a principal alliance of empire, the rule set which governs the device identifies a payoff within association to the development of a game outline exhibiting the device's behaviorisms and an alternative means to the apocalyptic return of the device to sync. Such payoff is denoted within the rule set exhibiting governance of the device as being within association to an element identified as the disciple Jesus loved. A game outline to mechanism design. The circumstances involved with biblical gospel are that which relate to a subset field of game theory identified as mechanism design. Mechanism design analyzes a type of private information game wherein a game creator identified as principal has developed a rule set rather than inheriting one, and it is the objective of a counterpart to such principal to make self-discovery leading to the development of a game outline exhibiting the mechanism's behaviorisms. The counterpart to such principle is given identification as an agent or agents, and beyond self-discovery, such counterpart lacks an overall involved awareness of the game's existence. Whereas this type of circumstance is subject to private information game theory identifies two types of information involved, being that of imperfect information and information that is identified as incomplete. Circumstances wherein imperfect information is a factor are identified by game theory as a mode wherein a player's inequity persists as a lack of specific information identifying a concise history of moves within the game, including that which game theory denotes as a game-initiating event. Alternatively, incomplete information is denoted as that which involves potential consequences related to the exercise of certain strategies. The rule set, which governs the biological mechanism within association to gospel, identifies cock-crow as the development of perfect information. Alternatively, the rule set which governs the device identifies a payoff associated with the development of a game outline, being that which is within association to an element identified as the disciple Jesus loved. Accordingly, a well-developed game outline is suitable to the repose of the device, in which case the device has fell into a state of desync. A well-developed game outline is necessarily exhibitive of perfect information and pronounces that which is suitable to some advantage to the device's stability and finality, being that which is exhibitive of information that is perfect and complete, being annihilative of the device's stochastic feature. Within respect to the pronouncement of information that is perfect, a supercomplexity within association to such determines the necessity of such development be within a frame of reference that is exhibitive of both that which game theory identifies as solution concepts and strategy sets, with the latter identifying a mixed strategy equilibrium, and an equilibrium game theory identifies as Nash equilibrium, with the latter being named after the premier game theorist John Forbes Nash Jr. In identifying with solution concepts, what is involved are formal predictions concerned with how the game will be played, and in identifying with strategy sets, what is involved are series of strategic moves. In order to identify with information exhibited within this table, it is necessary to begin with understanding the role binomialism plays within Gospel. It is also necessary to develop an understanding that the timeline of depictions Gospel identifies exhibitive of concurrence rather relates information that lacks the prospect of informedness if such is not identified as anachronistic and something that ought to be identified in consecutiveness. Thus, denotations identifying activities involved with baptism are commensurate to that which is within association to the biological mechanism's reification of objectives, and moreover the itinerant depictions involved with the subject of the narrative identify strategy sets. Strategy sets are necessary to both the device's reification being part of a mixed strategy equilibrium and part of the instrumentation of client states. Beyond strategy sets, itinerant depictions identify solution concepts. Gospel is composed of a type of non-consecutiveness that is defeating to the development of understanding, and such non-consecutiveness is best exhibited as an unorientable surface, wherein one face of the surface denotes something within association to something identified upon the other side of the face. However, upon returning to the former there is something else, which was uninterpretable without a development of understanding derived from the latter, and so forth. In beginning to identify with strategy sets, a framework composed of denotations given as walking on water and feeding the multitudes is exhibited within Gospel. The former is exhibitive of a mixed strategy equilibrium necessary to the device's reification of technological advancements, and the latter is exhibitive of Nash equilibrium. Both equilibriums are variable, and aside from the reification of such technological advancement within association to the infrastructure necessary to modern finance, the latter is without the substance of exercisability. Whereas such denotations identify a framework within association to strategy sets, the literary device exhibits revisionism within respect to the development of variations to such framework. Beyond such framework, a strategy set is identifiable within the non-synoptic John being that which is exhibited canonically within reverse throughout the manuscript, and being that which is involved with the device's resolution to desync. In beginning to alleviate super-complicatedness within association to the development of information that is perfect, it is necessary to identify the problem as that which is commensurate to a stochastic process. Stochastic processes are considered mathematical objects and irresolute to mathematical formulation. Game theory identifies potential non-finiteness as an indomitable characteristic of stochastic processes. The closest game theory comes to identifying with circumstances related to gospel being exhibitive of an innate stochastic feature involves a subset field of game theory which studies games of private information identified as mechanism design. However, mechanism design lacks a fundamental characteristic necessary to the exhibition of stochastics, wherein statistical data is necessary to such communication. Accordingly, stochastic processes are effectively represented graphically, and the predominant method of such graphical representation involves that which is identified as a Markov chain. A key denotation referenced within Gospel within respect to identifying a topologically sound spacetime continuum within respect to that which Gospel identifies below the surface is that which is denoted within association to transfiguration. In beginning to develop an understanding of Gospels, it is essential to identify that personage within Gospel anachronistically identifies other than that which is implied, and that what is identified as John the Baptist is that which is denotive of the ancient Roman Empire, and accordingly, what is identified as baptism is that which is suggestive of militarism or regional destabilization of ecopolitical states. Accordingly, a key aspect of what is denoted as walking on water is that which involves the structural fluidity of a principal alliance of empire, and thus such fluidity is within association to a payoff being exhibitive of a cleansing of reputation. In developing an understanding, it is a benefit to identify with tyranny, and to establish that such is moreover that which is composed of various elements which appropriate such identification, and therefore such within exercise is that which appropriates countermeasures, and thus the exercise of structural fluidity is that which is a contravention to such identification. Accordingly, the model within development is that which is exhibitive of the topology identifying such structural fluidity, and the key denotation is that which identifies that the subject of the narrative's face changes within a depiction in association to transfiguration, and notably this occurrence follows the beheading of John the Baptist within synoptics, however, is absent altogether within the non-synoptic John. In accordance with such denotation, gospel identifies disciples as baptizing. What such denotation suggests is that which is commensurate to a historically evincible era of regional destabilization associated with the subjugate states of the Empire Church throughout a period commonly identified within association to Dark Ages, Crusades, Inquisition and Renaissance, and up until a key dissident alliance has both demonstrated superiority over empire and as well developed such superiority upon the other end exhibitive of a span marking great distance. Within such respects, a factor identified as human geography has developed into play. The persistent destabilization of culturally bound ecopolitical states over a long period resolved into the formation of survivalist alliances, commencing into multicultural ecopolitical states, and innate to such commencement began experimenting with various means of facilitating trade. The devices resolved to such circumstance is exhibited by what game theory identifies as a Nash equilibrium, wherein the evolution of the game culminated into stagnancy, wherein the identified strategies had become exhausted, and neither player could advance without influencing their opponent to change their own strategy. Such stagnancy within the evolution of the game's development exhibits what game theory identifies as Nash equilibrium, and the importance of discovering such state is that to identify the greatest substance of the overall game form. In identifying Nash equilibrium within association to gospel, one is given the opportunity to observe the importance of what is gospelly related as. Do not put new wine into old wineskins, for the wineskins will surely burst. And do not sew an unshrunk patch on an old piece of cloth, for the cloth will surely tear away. The rule set which governs the device identifies dissidents as money changers, being that such persistent destabilization has led to the on-again off-again practice of identifying with fiat currency, which according to the rule set which governs the device is the cultural property of an ancient empire, although the means involved with the exercise of such proprietorship is something which is esoterically referenced. Within respects to the emergence of the device, a necessary preclusion involved successful eradication of historically evincible militarism from association to the device's origin being exhibitive of what game theory identifies within association to imperfect information, or more precisely a game-initiating event. Also, the literary device mispronounces a compendium of appropriations associated with various ancient cultures, exhibiting a means to confound the masses by invitation to a Babylonic period of emergence, ultimately a component of the innate stochastic feature necessary to the device's reification of an objective within association to modernity. By keen design of the device and subsequent to the fulfillment of such objective, any identification with such mispronouncing of appropriation is moreover lacking any great substance. However, within respect to the instrumentation of stable client states, one such appropriation stands out as being valuable within accordance to the exercise of a strategy inadmissible to the device. Accordingly, mechanism design theory identifies that a mechanism designer hopes to develop a mechanism that implements some social choice function, and moreover, this is within association to what may be evinced as an incentivized arbitrary mechanism. Means necessary to such evincing involve that which game theory identifies as a revelation principle. To identify why such is a matter of relevance, it is necessary to exhibit the means and objectives involved with the exercise of equilibrium, and therefore return to the subject of strategy sets. In identifying with strategy sets, informedness involves more than a single element within every respect, and moreover, aside from the destabilizing characteristic associated with a mixed strategy equilibrium, such involves the instrumentation of a stable client state and a client state fit to some purpose. Within respect to elements within gospel identifying strategy sets, what must be drawn from is that within gospel, which identifies regime. Regime is esoterically denoted within two parables, which pronounce a lacking substance within respects to understanding without the juxtaposition of supporting context. Such parables are identified as the parable of the sower and the parable of the minas or pounds. In order to identify with information this table exhibits, it is necessary to develop an understanding which identifies that the upper strategy is that which is suitable to incentivizing members of a client state into labors necessary to the development of technology suitable to the fulfillment of an objective exhibitive of modern finance, and that moreover the lower strategy is an example. However, such lower model is capable of far more diversity. Though, notably, the lower model is without applicability without the necessary element of modern finance facilitating fiat fiduciary transfers. What the parable of the sower identifies is regime. Within respects to the device's reification of objectives and a mixed strategy equilibrium, denoted as walking on water, the parable of the sower identifies regime exhibitive of a cartel strategy necessary to persuading an unsuspecting client state into activities necessary to the fulfillment of objectives. Within respects to the instrumentation of stable client states, the rule set identifies within the framework a variable equilibrium set denoted as feeding the multitudes. The variability of such equilibrium determines that such is involved with means to instrument client states into oligopoly, neurotic police states, and the necessary means to instrument the exercise of Nash equilibrium, and even the instrumentation of federalized states susceptible to election fraud. Mechanism design theory denotes such variability as being within association to the incentivization of agents within the fulfillment of objectives, and as such pertains to the instrumentation of stable client states. Such variability is necessary to a plurality of objectives which revisions to the rule set within gospel identify elementally. However, an origination of such conceptualization is exhibited by the literary device within an element of the framework, denoted as feeding the multitudes. Thus, what ought to be identified is that within the development of the game rule set within concert to military adventurism, the objectives and means involved with strategy sets and such instrumentation of client states was not fully realized. There are two primary objectives outlined within the rule set, which governs the device, being that which is involved with the fulfillment of an objective within association to the development of technology necessary to the age of modern finance, and alternatively an objective involved with the reassociation of an invaluable utility to a principal alliance of empire. As a biological mechanism, the device is composed of various interassociations, and the rule set, which governs the device, exhibits such in depictions identifying personages as placeholders within such composure, and sometimes the rule set identifies such within accord to non-personages such as a fig tree or a shoal of fish. Moreover, the device is imposed upon by a stochastic feature, which eliminates any precise determination of potentiality concerned with the device's outcome other than to identify that within a stage associated with the device's fulfillment of an objective exhibitive of technology and infrastructure necessary to modern finance, the device's composure is that which is commensurate to a bifurcate being exhibitive of two primary components identifiable as a principal imperial alliance and a counterpart to such being exhibitive of a dissident alliance, the latter of which has come into possession of an invaluable utility being a byproduct of the device's fulfillment of such objective. What is most exhibitive within respect to variability between synoptics and non-synoptical, composing the greater part of the literary device identifying a rule set, which demonstrates governorship of a biological mechanism, is the composure of the device within the penultimate stage, being moreover a composure determined by a preordinance necessary to the device's finality, being that which is within association to egalitarian society, and moreover such composure is determined by a contingency within association to either the exercise or occlusion of a strategy inadmissible to such finality, and thus the exercise of inadmissible strategy determines an apocalyptic resolution is necessary to the device's return to sync, aside from the development of a game outline identifying the rule set which governs the device. Such alternative to an apocalyptical resolve or desync is identified within association to an element, denoted as the disciple Jesus loved, and such development of an outline exhibitive of the device's behaviorisms and capable of returning the device to resync also requisites a coercion of the device's stochastic feature, and accordingly the rule set outlines such circumstances as within association to a key payoff. Within the present stage, the device is involved within pursuits suitable to the reassociation of an invaluable utility a dissident alliance possesses pursuant to the device's fulfillment of an objective exhibitive of the technology and infrastructure necessary to modern finance. Such reassociation is an alternative to amalgamation, and due to such dissident alliances exercise of a strategy inadmissible to the device's finality. The strategy set associated with such pursuit involved with reassociation of an invaluable utility to principle is indexed in the non-synoptic genre moreover throughout and within reverse canonicity. The key to understanding such pursuit is within association to a relationship between a depiction wherein the subject of the narrative cures an individual's blindness by applying a compound of dirt and spit to the eyes and instructing such personage to bathe, and a depiction involving an individual who has been waiting for 38 years to enter healing waters. Accordingly, circumstances involved with the presidency of Donald J. Trump being exhibitive of an FBI inquisition into his campaign affairs resulted in disfavor within political polls and being suffixed by an opportuneness or invitation to raise favor in polls with a bolstering of the domestic economy faced with hysteria in association to a virus pandemic, and such involved significant amounts of leftist provisions, resulting in the creation of trillions of dollars necessary to such resource. However, such has developed into a steep rise in inflation being commensurate to that which gospel identifies as being related to a personage taking a bath within association to having spit applied to his eyes. Alternatively, the circumstances involved with such bolstering and subsequent steep rise in inflation will continue and compound into fear as to what would happen if such bolstering were to be again the resolve of government, and such is exhibited as a personage who remained idle upon a mat lacking the necessary substance to enter healing waters for 38 years. To append to the future of such typology, begin to identify with an occasion depicted in Gospel wherein the subject of the narrative persuades a Samaritan woman possessing a pitcher suitable to drawing water from a well to abandon her pitcher, being exhibitive of an occasion wherein a dissident alliance in fear of woes within association to a destabilized economy returns to a standard of monetary equivocation, which seems more stable than what the alternative had offered. Such then commences into and fulfills an objective identified within Gospel, being exhibitive of that which is identified as turning the tables on the money changers. Within respect to the device's reification of technology and infrastructure commensurate to modern finance, what has been involved is exhibitive of a symmetric mode of cooperation wherein the payoffs are determined by the strategies exercised. Within such respects, the innateness of circumstances involved with dissidents being subject to perpetual destabilization has been appropriated by a countermeasure of principle by principle's efforts to remain structurally fluid. Such circumstances are that wherein the strategy exercised by dissidents has been to change the way their currency has been evaluated within response to destabilization by exhibiting on again-off-again identification with fiat. However, within circumstances at hand. Such strategy will result in an exceedingly dire outcome for said dissidents who have come to rely on such invaluable utility, however a reliance not exhibitive of entireness. Game theory identifies a mode of conflict wherein one player possesses some advantage over another which is asymmetrically realized, exhibitive of an advantage unrealized by the player within possession of such advantage. However, a counterpart to such advantage is player realizing their own disadvantage and seeking to diminish such inequity prior to the discovery of such by the player lacking realization of their advantage. Game theory denotes such circumstance as being within association to such player lacking in identification with such inequity, possessing higher ground. Accordingly, the payoffs within such type of gameplay are exclusive, meaning that the payoff structure is exhibitive of each player having a unique payoff set. Whereas such advantaged player within this circumstance is at a disadvantage within association to the presence of asymmetric information, it is necessary for such player to make some move, being that a great number of unproven strategies are more advantageous than continuing to pass. The mysteries surrounding an incongruous background within the image identified as Mona Lisa created by the master painter Leonardo da Vinci pays tribute to such occasion wherein the circumstances are that being exhibitive of a mode of conflict wherein opponents do not possess even ground. Accordingly, the United States of America has over the course of the last century been instrumented into an oligopoly wherein a small conglomerate of corporations control a vast network of logistical distribution necessary to supplying the nation with nutritional provisions. The depiction involving what identifies a Samaritan woman at Jacob's Well engaged with the subject of the narrative is concluded with the woman leaving behind her pitcher of water, which is exhibitive of an alliance of dissidents who is by arduous labors denoted within a depiction of a poor old widow as contributing more to the kingdom than any other. Determined such means of exchange is unstable. And following such depiction Jesus' disciples return identifying a structurally fluid principle. Alliance, which has become more centralized to great extent. What is depicted following such event involves the subject of the narrative being asked by his disciples if he is hungry, wherein his response is, "I have food that you do not know," pronouncing what game theory identifies about incomplete information being exhibitive of an outcome within association to the exercise of certain strategies and identifying that such outcome is within association to a principal alliance's involvement within oligopoly which its counterpart exhibits having overall control over a logistical network necessary to the distribution of nutritional provisions. The appropriation of such circumstances exhibit malevolence and misanthropy and moreover will result in a type of institutionalized famine wherein the means to provision the masses is eliminated by individuals who have influence within such infrastructure being persuaded to withdraw their capital investment, thereby evolving into a bank run type scenario that has dire implications upon markets in exercise over such. If there is neither resolve to eliminate such oligopoly nor to developing legally binding allegiance from such, then the nation is at such substantial risk of such direness within association to apocalypticism that any measure capable of identifying such outcome to the higher offices of government is deemed reasonable and prudent. The strategy set exhibiting punitiveness within association to a dissident alliance's exercise of strategy inadmissible to the device's egalitarian finality and demonstrative of apocalyptic means to return the device to sync are identified within gospel canonically within reverse to the serial application necessary to and involved with the desired outcome, as a woman who pours precious oil on the feet of the subject of the narrative. An adulteress who is not condemned. A man whose blindness was cured with spit and dirt. A man who failed to get into healing waters. A woman who leaves behind a pitcher of water. A cursed fig tree. Such, above, accumulatively objectify an outcome commensurate to what the rule set denotes as turning the tables on the money changers being exhibitive of that which identifies that such outcome was from the onset of the rule set's development identified within the framework of the rule set, and thus the primary objective within respects to gospel seems to be involved with a proprietorship of fiat currency. The means involved with exercising such proprietorship has involved the fulfillment of an objective exhibitive of the technology and infrastructure necessary to modern finance, and within such respects, the means involved a reifying biological mechanism subject to an innate stochastic feature. The rule set identifies resurrection as a reemergence of empire, and such may be attained within respect to the development of perfect information necessary to the coerced annihilation of the device's stochastic feature, otherwise the device is resolute to an apocalyptic means of resync wherein the outcome is identified as the entry into Jerusalem. Such apocalyptical resolve is avoidable, however such alternative is an invitation to demagoguery necessary to the reemergence of empire. Thus, the available outcomes are limited to that which is exhibited as the apocalyptic resync of the device, where an egalitarian society is preordained and being gospelly exhibited as the entry into Jerusalem following an apocalyptic precession necessary to the egalitarian preordainment, or alternatively the reemergence of empire gospelly identified as resurrection though blight with demagoguery. The necessary means involved with the latter is exhibitive of a game outline to mechanism design identifying perfect information, complete information, strategy sets, solution concepts, mixed strategy equilibrium and Nash equilibrium. Accordingly, such foundation to disillusionment or perfect information is exhibited within gospel as cock-crow, and upon such invitation the device will exhibit behaviors which otherwise the device has taken great measures to conceal. Such is exhibitive of quantum superposition, wherein an agent exhibits certain behaviorisms until such behaviorisms are identified, and then accordingly, such agent alters their activities becoming involved within new activities. What is identified as asceticism being exhibited within Gospels throughout bears an association to that which mechanism design relates, maximizes some value criterion, and such is invariably within association to what is gospelly identified as a woman pouring expensive oil upon the feet of the subject of the narrative and exhibitive of a key element being in association to what game theory identifies as Nash equilibrium or a key strategy set. Within understanding such circumstances, it is of greatest significance to identify what is involved with what game theory denotes as Nash equilibrium, and such most favorably originates from the development of understanding related to what is referenced within a depiction identified as a marriage on the third day. What is offhandedly identified relates to the pure reputation of a dissident alliance and the necessity involved with putting a bad mark upon such alliance exhibited as the master of ceremonies remark that the best wine had been saved for last. Accordingly, Nash equilibrium is identified within association to behaviorisms the device exhibits as an occasion wherein an alliance of dissidents is influenced to alter strategies given that neither player can progress without demonstrating such influence over their opponent. Within gospel, wine and baptism binomially denote militarism, and gospel identifies a woman pouring expensive oil upon the feet of a personage representing a principal imperial alliance. Historically, such is exhibited as an occasion wherein a principal alliance of empire has influenced an alliance of dissidents having come to possess an invaluable utility into waging conflicts within regions rich with petroleum reserves. The strategy set exhibitive of Nash equilibrium within Gospels is contained within a series of references depicting a Good Samaritan and a friend at midnight, which are interceded by a depiction which references a historical occasion within association to the siege of Jerusalem, wherein a Jewish woman named Mary offered Roman soldiers a piece of her child to eat as she had prepared the child for herself to consume. Perfect information. Game theory identifies that certain private information games exhibit a characteristic of asymmetric information wherein not every player possesses critical information. Game theory treats such asymmetry according to a standard specific to either information considered imperfect or incomplete. Within respect to exhibiting topology within gospel pronouncing the behaviorisms of the device, what is first necessary is to identify a dualistic narrative within the manuscripts. Other than a narrative identifying the activities of an itinerant Nazarene Gospels pronounce a narrative associated with baptism wherein baptism is attributed to both John and disciples. Such alternative narrative is essential to curating an understanding of the device's behaviorisms in accord with a state necessary to the reification of an objective exhibitive of modernity. Such reifying state is tertiary to the mechanism's composure. Game theory identifies that information asymmetry applies to a history of moves within the game and to such a degree that involves what the theory identifies as a game-initiating event. What Gospels exhibit in accord to what is identified as literature is something confounding to analysis in that the narrative exhibitive of an itinerant Nazarene suggests causality within association to the Christian Church and in parallel doctrine suggests an occasion gospelly denoted as the coming of the Son of Man pronounces an outcome within association to such circumstances. However, it is rather that what is denoted as the coming of the Son of Man is within association to causality, and the narrative identifying the activities of an itinerant Nazarene conceal various elements of a rule set which governs the device. Such elements may be identified as strategy sets, solution concepts, and potential finalities within association to the device's outcome. Within respect to strategy sets, two key strategy sets which game theory denotes are a mixed strategy equilibrium and Nash equilibrium are identified within gospel. In identifying with theology and the relevance of gospel, there is commonly a pronouncement of an original covenant and a new covenant. Within respect to the original covenant, the acquisition of the promised land evinces a history that exhibits sordidness, and within such respects, what ought to be observed is that aristocracy sought to exhibit such sordidness as a blight to Israel's espousal to the Creator. However, the means of such exhibition determined that empire was also subject to such criticism, and thus aristocracy developed alternative means to pronounce victory and divinity, and such means are exhibited as a biological mechanism having demonstrated success within the reification of modernity. The problem this circumstance faces is within association to the necessary composure of biological mechanisms, being that which is exhibitive of various interassociations necessary to the device's reification. Accordingly, the composure within the device's tertiary stage is exhibitive of a bifurcate wherein a principal alliance demonstrates intellectual superiority over an alliance of dissidents, being that which is necessary to the incentivization of the dissident alliance into labors necessary to the reification of the device's primary objective. Whereas such dissident alliance is demonstratively apt to identify such commensalism over time, the rule set identifies regional destabilization of such dissidents as a means within concert to such exercise of intellectual superiority. In respect to that identified as intellectual superiority, what is entailed is characteristic of regime. In any case following the tertiary stage of the device, an inclusion is necessary, being that which is exhibited as within association to what game theory identifies as being essential to imperfect information, or that which is denoted as information asymmetry within respect to what is identified as a game-initiating event.